All right, welcome everyone. Already into July. Summer's going by fast, at least from my perspective. Welcome everyone. Just get right into it here. Just a note, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the online resources webpage, which I'll reference in a little bit. Right here, wikiwatershed.org/DRWI. You can either go directly to that page or just Wiki Watershed, and then there's a DRWI tab that will take you in there. There's not only videos, but there's all kinds of other resources, links to the manual, links to quick guides, links to the EnviroDIY field visit data sheet, and so on. These meetings are every third Thursday of the month, 2:30 to 3:30, same Zoom link every time. Save all this for your records if you choose, mark your calendars. I send an reminder email a week prior and the morning of. If you have any folks that would like to be added to that distribution list, feel free to be in touch and I'll add them to that list. So just as a reminder, attendees of these meetings are often from the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, also just folks working in the Delaware Basin that are not specifically working with DRWI. And then we have a few folks that are attending who are outside of the DRB. Stroud Center supports this work, these meetings, as well as all of our other work around these monitoring stations in the Delaware Basin via the DRWI grant from the William Penn Foundation and via Seesaw, which is a Pennsylvania DEP Growing Greener grant. Here's the website for the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, 4 states, 1 source. And that's a William Penn Foundation project. And then Seesaw, Consortium for Scientific Assistance to Watersheds. There's the website for that. Again, that's a PA-DEP Growing Greener. So goals for these meetings, just time to check in, ask questions. We do provide regular updates from the Stroud Center folks. Often those are from Shannon Hicks and Rachel Johnson on technology updates, but just a lot of other general updates for station users. We have a presentation usually every time. Today it's going to be from a watershed, just a couple of watershed groups working in the more the northern area of the Delaware Basin. And then we, just as a reminder, we just are doing these to support collecting good data and using it purposefully in the Delaware Basin. So that's me. Rachel Johnson, one of the technicians, the primary technician doing a lot of help across the basin troubleshooting. Krista Reeves with the Musconetcong Watershed Association and Shannon Hicks. And Elena has come on recently to help Rachel with a lot of the field work. Carol Armstrong and George Seeds have been key and continue to be key components as representatives of the Master Watershed Steward Program. They are available for mentoring. And then the Stroud DRWI leads include John Jackson, Matt Earhart, and Dave Arscott. Our primary goal from the Stroud Center perspective with this EnviroDIY and the DRB effort is to support station owners in using the stations for their own purposes. Secondarily, we are analyzing the data internally and developing tools to help users interpret, analyze, contextualize, and communicate their data. So this is a general agenda. I'm going to go through updates here immediately, and then we'll let our presenters take over, and then hopefully we'll have some time for discussion at the end. So updates. So just a reminder that there is a new EnviroDIY monitoring station manual. It's been updated and is a lot more current and has a lot more useful information in there. It's a searchable knowledge database. So you can just type in whatever you want to search for and then go to these easy tabs or go to these easy tabs to get the information you're needing. And there's also this station parts list. So this is one of the real key differences between this manual and the previous one. You can access all of the different parts and how to buy them. There's vendor links, so on and so forth, for building a station or replacing parts or whatever. And that's easily accessible within the manual. Just a reminder that we also have this field service request form that you can fill out. If you're having trouble with your station, you can just fill this out. It asks you for various different pieces of information to feedback to Shannon and Rachel primarily to help troubleshoot before going out to the station. And then just a reminder that all these different resources that we generally are talking about are going to be available at this direct website, or you can just go to Wiki Watershed and click on this tab here. So I will pass it off to Rachel Johnson to talk about some more of these more technology specific updates. Rachel, do you want me to just scroll through for you on the presentation here, or do you want to switch screens?
You could just scroll through, that'll be easiest.
Okay, well,
Thanks.
take it away then.
All right, just a couple quick updates from us. First off, I hope everyone's staying cool out there, and quick reminder, if you're doing field work, to bring extra water and let someone know that you're going out to the field, and also when you return, just keep in mind on safety in these hot conditions. So our first reminder is just general troubleshooting. If your station drops offline, what do we do? So you're looking on Monitor My Watershed, and if you see that your station has dropped offline, meaning the little icon has turned yellow or red, you want to look and make sure that your battery voltage is above 3.5 volts. If it is, that means that your station is offline for a reason other than battery level. And the first thing that you want to do in that case is go out to your station and restart the data logger. So to do that, you turn the data logger off, which is the left-hand green circle there that Dave has up on his screen. And then you're going to remove the SD card, swap it out with a new one, and turn the station back on. And then please send the SD card file to us if you need any help interpreting your data. But usually we're seeing with these new Mayfly version 1.0 or 1.1s that we've been putting out and upgrading, that a quick restart, just turning the station off and on, is enough to fix the issue and get your station back online. So just a quick reminder there. And Dave, if you could go to the next slide. One of the pieces of technology that we realized we hadn't gone over with you, and that is really, really helpful in troubleshooting, is this. See if you can see it. It is a, sorry, my screen is blurred.
Oh, yeah, and Rachel, I'm not sure I have, for some reason, people's images aren't coming up on my screen for.
Oh, right, people can't see me.
Yeah.
Well, you'll see it in the next couple slides anyway. It's a device that changes your SDI 12 address on your CTD sensor from 0 to 1. So if you are purchasing a new sensor or deploying a new station where you have to purchase a new sensor, Meter Group sends your CTD sensor preset to channel 0. And the Mayfly is programmed, the code that's pre-written is talking to the CTD sensor on channel 1. So if you just get your sensor from Meter Group and plug it in, you're going to get that dreaded -9999 for all 3 parameters on your CTD sensor, because the Mayfly doesn't know how to talk to your sensor yet. So you can purchase this little, it's called a ZSC Bluetooth sensor interface, and it's super user-friendly, really easy, and also fairly cheap to buy. It's $79, and with tax and everything, it's $93. So you can buy this, and you can see there's just a stereo plug-in where you can plug in your CTD sensor right into this device. It's the only plug-in on the device, and there's only one other button. So you hit the button to turn it on and then plug your sensor in. And Dave, if you go to the next slide, it's really useful because not only can you use this device to change the channel, which previously you would have had to have a whole other separate mayfly and program your mayfly with a sketch to change the channel. You can also see minute or even second readings of your data live. And there's also this really helpful status window that if your CTD sensor reaches a temperature where freeze was likely, it'll pop up and show you that there's a potential freeze damage. And yeah, if you go to the next slide, we have, so the Bluetooth device connects to an app on your phone called Zentra Utility is the name of the app. And you pull up the app and it automatically starts searching for the Bluetooth device, and you'll see it pop up in the window. You click on it and you'll see this screen that Dave is sharing here, where it gives you the serial number of your sensor, the status, which you can see in this case is a green check showing everything is good. And then it'll show you your measurements in live intervals. So it'll have your water depth, temperature, and conductivity right there. To refresh it, you just have to hit that cycling button at the bottom, and it'll refresh those readings as many times as you hit that button. So it's really, really useful for troubleshooting because sometimes you can get that negative 9999 reading if there's a damaged Grove cable or headphone jack, but you can plug this into the device and make sure that your sensor is reading as it should. And then on the next slide, we'll show you how to change the channel on your CTD sensor. In the bottom right corner of the app, there's three dots that say more. You hit that button and there'll be a little scroll down window where you hit sensor tools, and then you'll see sensor SDI 12 address. And it's really user friendly. There's not that many other options. So if you forget this, you click around a couple times, you'll be able to find it, no problem. And then you'll see a little window pop up, and the address will be preset to 0. You just have to click that drop down button and change it to 1. And that's all it takes to change the channel of your sensor. So it's really easy, very user friendly compared to our previous way of changing the channel, which was totally programming a new mayfly with the channel changing sketch. So I believe, Dave, a couple of slides ago, we had the link to access this device, but you can also find it on Meter Group on their web page. If you want, I can put the link in the chat. So it's really, really helpful for troubleshooting and if you're buying any new sensors to change the channel. So we just wanted to make you aware of that.
Yeah, Rachel, why don't you post that into the chat, or I can do it after they
Yeah, I could do it. That's okay. No problem. And that is all I had for updates.
All right. So any questions at this point, any quick questions at this point before we move on to the presentation?
Yes, I have one, Dave. Rob Tuttle here.
Okay, Rob.
So Rachel, there's a means to upload from the SD card to monitor my watershed. Do you all know that that's working?
I
think
it is.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dave.
No, sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
It is working. I don't know about how many weeks or months in a row you're able to upload. Dave, do you have that piece of information?
It's supposed to be you can do a large amount now, Rob. So I would definitely try it out and give us feedback. But the recent changes in Monitor and that transition to Amazon Web Services and such, that was something that was worked, and we have gotten reports that it has worked for people with larger files. So I would give it a whirl. It is supposed to work at this point.
Okay, I'll give it a try and then I get back because I would love to be able to use that.
Yeah, definitely give it a try and just be in touch, because we definitely want feedback if it's not working for some reason.
Thank you very much, Dave and Rachel.
Awesome.
Yeah, I had a question, Rachel. The magic box, basically you plug the CTD sensor into it, and then it reads out via Bluetooth to your iPhone. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it basically just reads the CTD sensor, but you have to unplug it from the Mayfly and
Yeah. Yeah,
into this
exactly. So
box.
you have to unplug it from the stereo connector and plug it into, I don't know if you
Okay.
can see my screen here, but there's
Yeah,
this one thing, and then you plug the CTD sensor just in like that.
okay, and that talks to your iPhone app via Bluetooth. Okay, thanks. I
Great.
missed that part.
Yeah,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome. And I'm gonna put the link for this product in the chat now.
Okay. So, and it looks like, who's this? Steve Grimm has a question. Rachel, if you wouldn't mind answering that in the chat. We should probably move on to the presentation at this point. So Alex, I guess you're starting the presentation, is that correct?
That's correct, David.
All right, so if you want to go ahead and share your screen and begin the presentation, we can, oh, actually, hold on, let me go back to here first and introduce our, I don't know if this is the official title, Continuous Monitoring of the Tunkhannock Creek Watershed in Anticipation for Possible Warehouse Development. Jeff Rogalski with the president of Tobyhannock Creek, Tunkhannock Creek Watershed Association, Alex Jackson, executive director of Broadhead Watershed Association, are our two presenters. They have a multi-team collaboration going on up in the Poconos, and they're going to present on their recent work monitoring that situation there. So I will stop sharing now and let you take over. Thanks, Alex.
Able to hear and see me?
Yes, we hear you. We're not seeing your screen quite yet, or at least I'm not seeing your screen quite yet.
No, still nothing.
Nope.
Hmm.
There it is. There it
Okay.
is.
You can see. Okay. So thank you so much, Stroud Water Research, for inviting BWA to carry out this presentation today. And it's going to be a two-part presentation. I will carry out the first half, and then Jeff Rogalski will carry out the second half. And the title, yes, the title will focus on that in the second half. And I just want to kind of give a general overview of monitoring the Pocono Mountains special protection waters. And here in the image is a good exemplification of one of the finest special protection waters in the state of PA, which is Tunkhannock Creek. The first part of the talk, I'm going to discuss, it's not letting me advance. Hold on one second here. The first part of the talk, I'd like to discuss the Broadhead Watershed itself, which is so I'm the executive director of the Broadhead Watershed Association. And the Broadhead Watershed is a 312 square mile, basically drainage basin in the middle Delaware. And the entire watershed is special protection, and many of the headwaters tributaries are designated as exceptional value. And a number of them were petitioned to become exceptional value as a result of our organization's work. And we have additional sections of the Broadhead Watershed, which we are seeking further petition at the moment. So it's a very large watershed. It's about 70% of Monroe County. And one of the distinguishing features of the Broadhead Watershed is the fact that there are very few impoundments from the mouth of the Delaware all the way up to many of its headwater tributaries. There really aren't any major impoundments, which really helps facilitate the existence of a robust, locally reproducing brook and brown trout population. Some of the key topographic features of this portion of middle Delaware, this is most of Monroe County, but also parts of Pike and Carbon. You have the Kittatinny Ridge, which of course goes along the Delaware. the Pocono Plateau, which is distinguished by the Pocono Plateau Escarpment, which begins down around your Carbon County and proceeds all the way up to Promised Land State Park. And then the dividing point for the Pocono Plateau is actually this Lehigh Gorge, which is a pretty remarkable geographic feature, which eventually goes up into the northwest here and hits the Wyoming Valley Mountains and the Music Mountains up there. So it's a pretty dynamic geographic area with a lot of different habitats in pretty close proximity to one another. And in this area, you have these three main watershed divides. The Broadhead Watershed, which is on the eastern side of the Pocono Plateau Escarpment, it are tributaries as a result mostly of groundwater seeps and also small wetlands which occur just at the very top of the plateau. But the Broadhead Watershed doesn't really go into the Pocono Plateau much. It's mostly in the drainage basin to the southeast of it and northeast. The Lehigh Watershed is most of the Pocono Plateau itself, and then you get a little bit of the Pocono Plateau, which forms the Susquehanna Watershed. And for this part of my talk, I'm going to focus on the Broadhead Watershed. So what are some of the key features of the Broadhead Watershed, in addition to the fact that there are very few impoundments and we have this robust macroinvertebrate and locally reproducing trout population. We also have many named waterfalls. This one here is from Buckhill Falls, but there are over a dozen other waterfalls. Most of them are along the Pocono Plateau Escarpment. And again, a lot of these tributaries begin just as bedrock bedding surfaces and cracks along the cliff escarpment face itself, which is around 1,000 feet. And this is pretty remarkable from basically from the escarpment all the way down to the mouth. And it's one of the largest watersheds in this section of the Delaware that is all special protection. So basically from the Broadhead up to the headwaters of the Delaware, you have pretty much all special protection waters. And I consider it to be one of the last refuges for special protection waters, because if you go out into the western portion of the state, you have a lot of fracking. Whereas in this section of the state, there's really no fracking wastes. There's no acid minage drainage in this portion of the Delaware River watershed. So most of our, and they have over 80% forest cover. So these are pristine, relatively, these creeks are in a state that if you were to travel back in time 300 years and look at the creeks, they wouldn't look too much different. So they're really in an undisturbed state, and we'd like to keep it that way. So I covered most of these key features of the Broadhead Watershed already. It's a large watershed, 300 square miles, very few impoundments. We have multiple exceptional value tributaries. In fact, 80% of all the EV watersheds in the Delaware are in Carbon, Monroe, Pike, and Wayne County. And we have a lot of them here in the Broadhead Watershed itself. And it's interesting that the headwaters don't really go into the Pocono Plateau at all. They all just basically form along that escarpment face. And then again, we have these locally reproducing brook and brown trout, which is pretty atypical in the state of Pennsylvania as a whole. Many of the local fishing clubs don't even have to stop because there's so much recruitment from these exceptional value tributaries during spawning season. Our organization has carried out quite a bit of monitoring lately, and also Paul Wilson from ESU in the Broadhead Watershed. And here's a map of the watershed where our sites are located. Most of them are on headwater tributaries. So Paul Wilson has the bulk of his on Cherry Creek, which is a tributary of the Broadhead. And then the Broadhead Watershed Association has pretty much all the rest of its mayfly loggers on little tributaries in the main branch of the Broadhead. And what we're really looking for here in the Broadhead Watershed is baseline data, because one of the challenges with the Broadhead Watershed Association's jurisdiction is incredible development pressure that many other parts of the middle and upper Delaware just don't see. We have just constant applications for what we're seeing more now are industrial use development plans in this special protection watershed. And so we strategically located these monitoring sites in areas where we may see potential future development, but we also put a couple of the loggers in baseline sites. For example, the one on Mill Creek is an exceptional value, or at least we petitioned it to be exceptional value. So we have both baseline, and then we also have some in places that are becoming more urbanized as a result of development pressure and decisions made at the municipal levels that are questionable. We have faced some challenges, though, in our monitoring efforts. One of the main issues with this particular watershed is the constantly shifting stream bed. Anytime we get a major rain event, there's a pretty good chance our mayfly loggers are going to have some challenges. Here's an example of one of our excellent volunteers, Todd Burns and myself, we were digging out one of the loggers after the hurricanes that occurred last August here, or that we had back to back. I don't know if they were technically hurricanes, but we got, like, between the two storms, we got probably over 10 inches of rain in a 2-week time frame. So most of the stream beds throughout the entire Broadhead watershed shifted dramatically. In this case, we had to dig out at least, I would say, at least 3 feet of just sediment to try to find the CTD sensor, which was perfectly functional after all that, which is pretty remarkable. But that's one of our main challenges. We have a lot of beavers, so most of our wires have to be covered by conduit. And another issue we have is the freezing temperatures. It's not atypical for us here in this portion of Pennsylvania to see weeks at a time where temperatures don't really go above 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Although climate change has really modified that dramatically, even just since I've moved here, in the past 10 years. But historically, it was not atypical to get weeks at a time with just 0 degrees Fahrenheit as a high. So we have to make sure all our loggers are down deep enough so that they don't freeze. And with these small tributaries, it's not always easy to find a hole that's 2 feet deep. So those are some of the challenges we faced. And but for the most part, we've been collecting continuous data for a couple of years now. One of the interesting features of some of the headwater tributaries in increasingly urbanized areas is that we're seeing that electrical conductivity peaks with snow melt events. So here from February to April, every one of these peaks in conductivity is when the weather warms up enough for the snow to begin to melt, or if we get a rain on snow event. And as expected, we see spikes in conductivity as a result of the dissolved road salt entering our creeks. The more urbanization, the more anthropogenic influence, the more the conductivity will spike. That's what we're finding. As a result of the conductivity measurements we've become aware of through basically our monitoring efforts, we actually applied for a grant through the DEP, a small grant, to do some graphs to determine what dissolved ions look like throughout the year, and also associated with snow melt events. So what we found is that dissolved chloride is chronically elevated in urbanized headwater tributaries in Mount Pocono. As you can see here on the y-axis is chloride, and the x-axis is a little complicated. It's just 6 different sites measured from June to March. And those spike, that really tall graph is basically a snow melt event where we peaked well above 600 milligrams per liter, which compared to places down in Maryland and Philadelphia might not be that high, but for creeks like ours, which are relatively undisturbed, it's causing some concern, especially when you look at the natural max, which is between 30 and 50 milligrams per liter. We're seeing chronically elevated levels well over 100 milligrams per liter in both these tributaries throughout the year. And previously published research has indicated that when levels are elevated chronically like that, it may have negative impacts on the base of the food chain. So that's just a very brief overview of the Broadhead Watershed Association's work. And we were happy to help facilitate the Toby-Tunk watershed's monitoring efforts when we learned of some of the major issues in that particular watershed, namely some pretty serious proposed industrial development. I personally live in Tunkhannock, in the Tunkhannock watershed, which is actually part of the greater Lehigh watershed. And I'm sort of on the dividing line between the Broadhead watershed and the Tunk watershed. So I'm fortunate enough to be within a 2-minute bicycle ride of some of the largest expanses of open space in this part of the middle Delaware. And also over the years, I've gained a really good working knowledge of the multi-habitat features of the Tunk watershed. And I'd like to just briefly discuss that before turning it over to Jeff. So this is the Toby-Tunkhannock watershed. On the right, you can see the Broadhead watershed I've delineated there. And that's right along the escarpment face. So I've kind of just roughly delineated the Broadhead along the escarpment face, and on the left there is the drainage area for the Toby-Tunkhannock watershed. And if you look at this, I'm going to try to focus on the Toby-Tunk watershed here. It has multiple different habitat types in a relatively small area. In the headwaters area, you have what is known as this glacial moraine habitat, because when the last glacier retreated, a lot of the material was just dumped there, and it creates these poor drainage areas intermixed with kind of a mosaic of different habitats where you have poor drainage wetlands, and then you have mixed hardwood forests, and then you have a huge swath of conifer forests here. In fact, this area here in this glacial moraine habitat is one of the largest continuous conifer forests in Monroe County. It's one of the largest I've seen actually in northeastern PA. It's just acres and acres, thousands of acres of hemlock, black spruce. Then in the wetlands, you have, you know, old growth wetlands of black gum and winterberry hollies and viburnums, just dozens and dozens of really interesting habitat mosaics up in that particular area. And then on the other, interestingly, on the southern side of the watershed is what's known as mesoctil barrens habitat, which is completely different, night and day difference from what occurs on the northern side of the watershed. So in the mesoctil barrens habitat, what we see are thousands of acres of basically scrub oak dominated ecosystems, which rarely exceed 30 or 40 feet in height. And this is a very, this habitat requires fires to be maintained. Basically, if fires don't come through periodically, the red maple and the oak will eventually grow in the overstory and prevent these shrubs from growing. So the Nature Conservancy, the Game Lands, the Bethlehem Authority have basically partnered over the past couple of decades to regenerate this habitat, and they've done an incredibly good job. It's really a remarkable place. They call it the Long Pond Conservation Easement, and that particular habitat has incredible wildlife value, mostly due to the presence of scrub oak, which produce masts sometimes every single year. A single tree can produce over a pound of acorns, and you have thousands of acres. You can imagine the abundance of wildlife. And this is also one of the top birding areas probably in the state. In my property, which is located in the mesoctil barrens habitat, I've identified just over the past month 40 different species, including some endangered species in Pennsylvania. So it's really, it's that close proximity of habitat types that seems to help really facilitate biodiversity here. And then in the center here is a more typical mixed hardwood forests, which are very common in the higher elevation portions of Pennsylvania, very typical of what you'd see in the Allegheny Plateau. You have a lot of black cherry, a lot of beech, birch, maple forests, and then conserved ag land. All those agricultural fields are under some form of permanent agricultural easement. So very little anthropogenic activity here in this particular watershed. And I just wanted to also point out the sheer abundance of undisturbed and old growth wetlands here in this watershed. Every one of these kind of makeshift circles I made here are just, some of them are primary, some of them have been disturbed slightly, but all of them are pretty much intact, no impoundments, no anthropogenic activity, at least within the past 60 to 80 years. And again, just incredible wildlife habitat. And it's important to mention that this watershed, as far as I know, is one of the most unique freshwater inland habitats in the entire state of Pennsylvania. And it's been called the crown jewel of the Poconos, just because it hasn't been impounded. Historically, the Lehigh and the Tobyhanna were similar, actually, but there's dozens and dozens of impoundments. You can even see a couple of them in the northern portion of the map, which have really severely degraded the habitat and also impacted water quality, especially temperature, because, you know, when you impound a wetlands, it's only maybe 5-10 feet deep. So during the summer months, it warms up quite a bit. So it's a really, this particular watershed is world-class, and the Nature Conservancy has chosen this particular site for conservation for a very good reason. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. And Jeff, take it away.
Okay, let me, oops, first things first. There it is. Okay, can everybody see that slide there?
Yep, good to go, Jeff.
All right. Okay, well, thanks, Alex. Just a quick rundown here. We've been in existence since 1991, blessed with a seasonal population. So as a result, kind of low activity sort of watershed association, but trying to keep a ride herd on things and protect what we have. But as a result, we're somewhat quiet and I would say unsophisticated here, just because we lack resources that larger watersheds have. And that's one of the reasons that we're really appreciative that Alex and BWA have come in and to help us with this stuff. So this is how the whole thing boils down here. This is a map from the exceptional value findings by the DEP. You can see all these areas that Alex showed in the various habitat types and how it was regarded by the EV review board. You can see all the entire length of the main stem. Where's my pointer here? Here it is. All the way down through here. All of this was designated EV for any number of, you can see the list of reasons that they've qualified, not just one, but a mix, a mosaic of various things. So the bottom line is something worth protecting. This is 31.6 square miles of the overall Tobyhanna-Tunkhannock watershed. These are the most special of our entire watershed. Just a couple of features. This is one of our this is a massive boiling spring. These are just views of the Tunkhannock and the Long Pond area. So you can see why it is we want to try to preserve it here. Here again is the length of the Tunkhannock Creek. These red areas are zoned for commercial development. You can see how the juxtaposition is alarming, and this is the stretches of this exceptional creek that are threatened. In this particular case study here, what we're going to do is focus in on, well, for whatever reason, suddenly our watershed has become a focal point for warehouse developments. There's like 5 or 6 of them that have just cropped up in the last 6 months. And rather than wait and see how it all breaks out, we took the position of defending against the first one, and hopefully setting a precedent that will make others take notice so that they're a little more thoughtful as they make further development propositions. Here is the subject site. Whoops, let's go back one. Can I go back? How do I go back? Back here. Okay, so we're talking about this area here is where this first warehouse development is targeted. You can see here's the Tunkhannock Creek coming by. They happen to own all of the hatched property. The plan is to develop just this parcel here, but with almost, it's like 80 or 90% impervious cover between the warehouse and then the last little bit is going to be a stormwater basin of some sort. And you can see there's very little remaining buffer between here, and they're cutting it right down to bedrock so they can infiltrate their stormwater or their wastewater. So we are, with our alert, our ears went up here as something that this is something we need to defend. So in order to design a sensor network layout for this thing here, obviously the first thing to worry about is an upstream site. It turns out this upstream site is one of the ones that was monitored for the EV study and is also monitored annually by the county. So it seemed a good idea to use the same one. And you can see only a fair sliver of this developed property actually would flow towards the Tunkhannock. And the fact is they're planning to cut this beyond all belief. So essentially this is actually the divide line now for runoff. The next concern here, well, the defensibility of the data is the critical thing here. So we have an upstream reference point. How do we then differentiate what is going on normally with this thing from what might be coming in from this development? And the thing to keep in mind here is that there's a second tributary that this feeds, which is over here and enters down here. So obviously that was the next spot we wanted to monitor. So that was our second location. And then comes the question of how to capture the collective, what gets mixed in from Kuiper Run with the upstream area here. So we became very concerned about mixing zone. And the way we developed that is we just started working our way downstream. and did readings at these various locations to determine if the mixing was actually happening. Our targets are, this first location was, right close to where it went in. We just kind of hoped it would just mix instantly, but obviously it doesn't. Then we tried a little further on down, trying to be upstream of the discharge from this development down here. That didn't work either. Finally, this one here also didn't work. We ultimately ended up having to pick a fourth spot way down here. So now we've got a little bit more of a problem here, making sure we can differentiate what might be influenced from a development of this warehouse versus just what's going on normally in this watershed. One of the possible solutions to this is putting in an additional sensor, this is getting a little intense with sensors, but putting one up in here to kind of at least screen out what might be happening from runoff from this highway crossing. In any case, here are the data that we used to kind of choose between these things here. You can see particularly the dissolved solids and specific conductance differences. Right here, it's about 2/3 of the way across, or 3/5, I guess that technically is. This was the upstream, the first location we tried. The second one, still about the same thing. No mixing going on really further than where it was. Again, same thing now down at the location 3, but finally location 4 all the way down. That's the reason it was selected. As you can see, this is pretty even across the stream channel. Still a little bit of evidence of mixing, incomplete mixing, but we decided close enough that we could defend it down the road. Ultimately, these are the 3 sensor stations that got set up. Again, thanks so much to Stroud here for all their efforts in making that happen. And here are as represented on the DIY, on the watershed, mounted our watershed. Final thing we want to show you here is a video. This is the link that between purposeful collection of data. The point is, we collect all this stuff. How are we planning to use it? We were fortunate to have the Delaware Riverkeeper Network take interest in what we're doing and give us some professional help in terms of public relations. And I think the video speaks for itself. I'll let David take over at this point.
All right, I'm going to, Jeff, do you want to stop sharing?
Done.
Okay, and I will share. I'm optimized. Out of, go. Okay. Here we go.
They're laying the groundwork to protect the Pocono area stream from degradation. A team from the
Hold on. Sorry, I'm going to restart that. I didn't have it at the beginning.
They're laying the groundwork to protect the Pocono area stream from degradation. A team from the Stroud Water Research Center, along with local groups, are installing sensors on the Taconic Creek in Monroe County. 2 types of sensors will be placed in the water.
This sensor, which is a sensor by meter group, measures 3 of those parameters: water depth, temperature, and conductivity. And the second sensor, which is a Campbell Scientific sensor, is measuring turbidity.
Several key factors determine the placement, depth, and location near the stream bank.
It's an optical backscatter sensor, so it is sending a light about a foot out into the water column and measuring what particles are reflected back to the sensor. So if anything is in that way of the field of vision, it'll foul your turbidity readings. Attach the PVC pipe, hose clamp together, and then this slides directly on the rebars.
The data is stored in a nearby station, but is also available online.
This data logger records data every 5 minutes, and using cellular telemetry, will send those data to an online portal called Monitor My Watershed. So every 5 minutes, it's taking multiple different parameters and sending them to an online portal for anyone to access.
2 of the monitoring stations are being placed on the Taconic and a third on a tributary called Kuiper Run. Local watershed groups are installing the monitors in order to collect data. The Taconic is a 19-mile stream and is listed as an exceptional value waterway by the Pennsylvania DEP. The designation prevents any degradation of water quality in the stream.
So in order to be able to kind of let any potential developer know what he's got to live up to, it's important to have a good sense of what the water chemistry is before they can consider developing. So we're in the process of setting up a system to document the baseline conditions so that we can detect any potential impacts and make sure that they're taken care of appropriately.
The residents say they are concerned about the effects of a 950,000 square foot warehouse project that would be built nearby.
And the first thing that would happen is it would clear cut that area. And then you're talking about a bunch of impervious surfaces that gets sun beaten down on it. And, it'll heat up the stormwater. And the biggest concern is thermal impact.
The project is in the early phases and still requires a number of state water quality permits.
At some point, they're going to have to get a permit for their wastewater and stormwater discharges. And that is where this data will come in most valuable. So we have, fortunately, a little bit of time to develop this baseline and know where things stand before they go to the permit process.
These data loggers cost about $100 a piece compared to $1,000 for a commercial device that benefits groups working to protect streams.
The cost of a setup like this versus a setup that Meter Group would sell you itself is expanding which groups can use these technologies and also install more of the sensor stations on a lower budget. So compared to something like the USGS monitoring stations, it's just a fraction of the cost.
It is very, very difficult once you've degraded something to restore it. So we feel it's very important to make sure before you allow something that may degrade something to be sure that it's not going to be irreparable harm.
Okay. So that was hold on a second here. It's going on to the next thing. Sorry about that. All right, that concludes the presentation.